Good afternoon, and welcome to the Museum of Science. I'm Dr. Cheryl Wojciechowski, Health Sciences Program Manager for the Current Science and Technology Center. Today we are proud to bring you a special event in collaboration with Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières. The Museum of Science, through initiatives such as the Current Science and Technology Center and the proposed Hall of Human Life, presents recent developments in biomedical technologies, especially those that affect our global community. Through presentations, research institute partnerships, and outreach, we hope to engage people in the scientific process, emerging technologies, and a more thorough understanding of the world we live in. Today, we have a unique opportunity to both learn from and talk with leaders in the fight against global malnutrition. Through this event, we want not only to reach the participants in this room, we strive to include a larger audience both during and after this event. The Museum of Science is streaming the happenings in this room to an overflow site on the floor below, as well as to 30 universities nationwide. We are also recording this event for webcast on the WGBH Forum Network. In addition, the audio portion will be available through podcasting. Internet sites for these outlets are listed above. We will also have a handout with these sites at a table on the door on your way out. Also check the table at the door for Doctors Without Borders bracelets, magazine articles, Museum of Science materials, and also information on the PBS series Prescription for Survival, a Global Health Challenge. Thank you very much for your interest and attendance today. We are happy that you're able to participate in these types of initiatives that are so important for our global and our local community. Today, first we will view a video from Doctors Without Borders and then have a moderated discussion through NPR's Richard Knox with Dr. Milton Tectonidis and Dr. Jonathan Spector. If during the event you would like to pose a question or a comment at the appropriate time, I ask that you kindly use the audience microphones here at the front of the room to ensure that all of our audiences can hear you clearly. Now, I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, Richard Knox, Health and Science Correspondent for National Public Radio. Since 2000, Richard Knox has appeared on NPR's Morning Edition, All Things Considered, Weekend Edition, Talk of the Nation, and newscasts. Among other topics, Richard Knox's NPR reports have examined the threat of pandemic influenza, emerging diseases such as Marburg and SARS, HIV/AIDS in Asia, Africa, North America, and the Caribbean, problems in the medical response to Hurricane Katrina, the fallout from the withdrawal of Vioxx, healthcare for the homeless, cancer detection and treatment, bioterrorism preparedness, and how the brain processes music. Quite a bit. Before joining NPR, Mr. Knox covered medicine and health for the Boston Globe. His award-winning 1995 articles on medical errors are considered landmarks in the national movement to prevent medical mistakes. He is a graduate of the University of Illinois and Columbia University. He has held year-long fellowships at Stanford and Harvard University and is the author of a 1993 book on Germany's healthcare system. Richard Knox, thank you for being with us here today. With that, I will turn the program over to you.
Thanks very much for coming out on this rare Indian summer November day in Boston, and thanks to everybody listening and watching in other media. I'm not going to talk much because, as Cheryl said, we're going to see a short video, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that in a second. But I probably should start by saying, at least from my perspective, and I suppose from many of yours, global malnutrition is one of those big, old, chronic, intractable problems that none of us really have a clue about what to do. We just read about the headlines from time to time from various exotic places in the world, and the horror stories all seem pretty much the same. There are agencies that are supposed to take care of this. We know that, and they more or less do sometimes, I guess. I think that the thing that is interesting today, and what I hope you'll all learn more about, I certainly did the other day when I had my first conversation with Dr. Tectonidis, is something encouraging on the front of attacking malnutrition. We will try to give you a little bit of primer on on what disease we're talking about when we talk about acute malnutrition in children, and the distinctions that need to be made between chronic malnutrition in many of these poor countries and the acute events that really are medical emergencies, and which the people at MSF are trying to tackle, and with some success, with some new technology. One of those fortuitous technologies that's cheap and easy and works. So that's what we're going to talk about mostly today. The film that we're going to start with offers us kind of a baseline of what treatment has been like for acute malnutrition in these food emergencies. It's a 14-minute pilot film, really, made by a group called Red Floor Films. If you've seen the Oscar-winning documentary called Born into Brothels, set in India, you've seen their work. The film that this little pilot film we're seeing is a pilot for a larger project that they're engaged in. It was shot in Niger earlier this year, in about April, at the beginning of the current and ongoing crisis you may have heard about last summer when it peaked. I'm told that with the harvest beginning this month, it may subside a bit, but still there are more than 1,000 admissions a week to MSF feeding centers to deal with this current crisis in Niger. On Friday, I'm told that the total admissions to the MSF programs in Niger, almost 56,000 kids in 8 feeding stations and 47 ambulatory care centers. And I think with that, we'll listen to the film. And should I introduce the speakers now, or would you like to have that after the film? Sorry. We did talk about that, but I don't remember. Okay, let's watch the film now, and then I'll tell you more about our speakers.
Niger is one of the countries where malnutrition has been a problem for a long time. Tens or hundreds of thousands of children are dying from malnutrition every year, but nobody's actually doing anything about it. And if it's a bad year and they haven't got that much, they can see that they're going to run out, then they cut down from 2 meals a day to 1. And the question often is, at what stage in the year do they cut down from 2 meals to 1? And once they cut down to 1 meal's not enough for a kid that's under 5 and growing. To 50,000 kids in one moment in time have acute severe malnutrition. Without medical treatment, around 90% of people that are affected under 5 years old, they'll die of that. They start losing their muscle mass. All of their physiology goes haywire much more quickly than adults, and that's why they're the most severely affected, and that's why they're the treatment group that we target.
On atteint 5 jours. C'est non compris les admissions, les nouvelles admissions.
Basically, the body starts eating itself up.
Cet enfant, on les prend prioritairement en charge. On perfuse et puis on lui donne des traitements antibiotiques à la fois. Et puis, le plus rapidement possible, on va la ramener à Maradi pour suivi intensif.
Given that there's usually only 1 or 2 cars, sometimes one kid who's not too bad, you'll wait and see if there's not another kid that's going to come the same day. If you transfer one that looks pretty sick and then 5 minutes later after the car's just left there's another one that turns up who's dying in front of your eyes, you feel pretty disappointed.
Hein? Il fait ça. Il fait. Là, il est dans un état de choc septique. De choc septique, oui. Probablement, on pense que l'enfant est intoxiqué, donc on va faire un lavement gastrique. Intoxication, ça? Ramène le truc. Haricot. Ça doit faire un bon bout de temps qu'il n'a pas mangé grand-chose. Déjà, il a eu un peu de dextrose à Madaroufa. Cette tentative de vouloir vomir, étant donné que l'estomac est vide, l'enfant n'arrive pas à vomir, nous lui avons quand même administré sa première ration de lait, vu que cet enfant... Donc là, il a commencé à vomir, toujours sous l'effet... Bah, nous compresse. Il est vraiment sonné, donc on va attendre encore dans 1 heure de temps, après la réhydratation, par voie parentérale et puis le protocole épinéphrine, pour pouvoir le juger.
Generally, children die once they get into that spiral. And unless there's an organisation around that's treating that on a large scale that they know about, the mothers will generally know it's kind of futile. What happens in Maradi now with the MSF program running there is that a mother that's got a kid that's getting sick that knows about this program, and most of the mothers do because kids have now been coming for years from different parts of the region, she'll decide one day, now I'm going to go and try and get my kid treated. When she gets to the centre, kid will get looked at by a medical practitioner from MSF who will decide whether the child's dying of malnutrition or not. What's confusing often for the mothers is that they might come with a kid who is still too high to actually be included into the program, and trying to actually explain that to a mother, your child doesn't qualify for medical treatment right now. The way things are going, if he loses another kilo, then he's in. You know, it's a very difficult thing to explain.
Koro ben c'est Asake. Donc elle c'est une maman qui vient d'Aké. Là elle est ici. Faut pas venir. Quoi la bataille là? Quoi la bataille?
Il a soif.
Il a soif aussi, il veut baigner quoi tous les temps.
Ok, tu le laisses en phase 1.
Non problème. Merci parce que dans les potonniers, bon, c'est un enfant déjà malnutri, fatigué. Bon, donc,
depuis hier. Habite où?
Ici à Maradi.
On la graisse là.
Ah non problème.
Bon, c'est pas grave. Ça va bien? Ok, je continue de faire ça.
D'accord, ok. Ça va? Tu mets un peu d'eau. Ah, la main.
Mais c'est bon, donc je pense que le transfert de cet enfant qui a été rapide a permis de le sauver. Vraiment, la période critique fatale est passée pour le moment pour cet enfant. Nous avons des enfants qui vont très mal, mais dans les phases aussi, on nous amène des enfants qui vont de mal en pire. On est obligé de se partager entre les enfants. Là, je suis obligée de laisser cet enfant un moment et voir l'autre.
Voilà. Ici, c'est la tente. La première tente de la phase 2 abrite des enfants qui vont relativement bien, qui vont passer ici quelques jours avant de regagner les phases externes.
When it turns around, you see this kid who's just sort of lying there like this. And basically, the mother just pushes stuff into the kid, small amounts, spaced out regularly over the day. And the kid managed to keep it down. Somewhere after about 3 to 7 days of that kind of treatment, the kid just suddenly wakes up and just starts grabbing everything and wants to eat. And it means that the point's been reached where the physiology's turned around and the kid wants to construct himself again. And so at that moment, then we know that we can go for it. So then we just load them up with as many kilocalories as we can and fatten them up. The good part is that, yeah, we can drain people from a long way away, relatively long way away, by having just once a week clinics that people get to know about. But that certainly doesn't help the basic problem in the country, which is that most people don't think that they can go and get healthcare. It's not the Nigerian government or the Nigerian people that decided that all patients should pay for their healthcare, regardless of their situation. It's the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund that have thrust that upon African countries. Everything was free in Niger before. You have an obligation to provide care to anybody who comes to you as well. And you can't just neglect that on saying, oh no, we'll just treat as many as we can and bugger the ones that are too sick. It's not possible. If you walk in there, you can say straight away, 20 or 30 of these kids are going to be dead, before they get out of this room. And that's actually pretty difficult to live with for a lot of the doctors and nurses. Such a high number of children are going to die, to be faced with that every day, to know that there's, unless something dramatic happens in the politics and the development of the country, then it's going to always be like that.
Cet enfant, dans les premières minutes, ça allait très bien. Et on commence à espérer. Mais du coup, on n'a pas pu le réanimer. On a fait tout ce qu'on pouvait faire. Il est décédé, je crois que c'est le choc septique sévère qu'il a apporté. Parce que s'il y a en moyenne un décès ou 1,2 par jour, c'est que sur 20, les autres ils vont là-bas.
So now they're saying this year in 2005 that they're going to run out of food, and we can be pretty confident that that's the case. With our means and with the other crises that are going on, how much effort and time and human resources do we have left? And how much will we have left when things go wrong?
I know. No, it just fell off. Are we mic'd? Can we be heard? So over 500,000 they projected this year in Niger. We're over mic'd. Let me tell you who you're going to be hearing from today. Dr. Milton Tectonidis is a Canadian national who's a nutrition consultant in the medical department of Doctors Without Borders. He's worked for MSF since 1992 in, among other places like Angola, Cambodia, Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, Liberia, Mali, Rwanda, Sierra Leone, and Thailand. He's worked in situations of conflict and in situations of epidemic and severe food shortage among displaced populations and victims of natural disasters and isolated rural populations inflicted with major endemic diseases such as sleeping sickness and tuberculosis and bilharzia and HIV/AIDS. He's a graduate of McGill in 1989. Recently, he's worked in Niger, where he coordinated the response to the ongoing emergency, and he scaled up MSF's use of outpatient care, which we're going to be talking about for severely malnourished children. As I mentioned, MSF has treated nearly 56,000 people so far in this year, which is far higher than any other previous nutritional intervention. Dr. Jonathan Spector, to my left and your right, is a pediatrician interested in infectious disease. He worked in 2004 as a volunteer for Doctors Without Borders in Darfur. His first mission for MSF was during a famine in Angola in 2002, where he supervised treatment in a large nutritional feeding center, which is the kind of thing you saw in this film. He cared for more than, or the center cared for more than 500 severely malnourished children. And earlier this year, Dr. Spector worked in a large community-based feeding program in Ethiopia. I think it might be a good idea, at least for some of us here, to try to get a little bit of a primer on what we mean by severely and acutely malnourished children as opposed to just chronically malnourished. What distinguishes the children, and especially this unfortunate little boy who died despite the intervention, what distinguishes them from kids who are just chronically malnourished? What's going on with them? You may want to just jump in on that one.
Well, if you have children, as a pediatrician, I see all the time, children here who have, say, a stomach bug, and it's a day or two without taking in, adequate liquids or food, and if you have children who've been through this, one sees how it doesn't take long for kids to sort of start not to be themselves and have that thing that makes kids so special, that kind of energy. So one can only then extrapolate and imagine, over the period of more days or weeks or months or really even years without adequate hydration and food, the effect that has on the body. So the child that was the focus of the film that you saw there's really two classic types of malnutrition, what kids with severe acute malnutrition look like, and one was like the youngster in that film who has something called marasmus. So marasmus is kids who are very small, thin, frail, wasted, very little subcutaneous fats. And then another type, you may have seen photographs of children who are kind of swollen, sort of swollen bellies, swollen extremities. Those kids are very fussy and irritable. Often their hair takes on this brittle, frail characteristic, and they have these typical skin lesions. So malnutrition, severe malnutrition can take a couple of different forms, and but besides the fact that the body just can't grow and develop as it normally would, severe malnutrition is associated with very serious complications, such as the child in the video had a bad infection. So the body, when the body's in such a weakened state, can't respond to infection. The immune system is suppressed. And these kids are also at risk for things like low body sugar, low body temperature, anemia, so low red blood cells, cardiac failure, and of course bad dehydration. So I don't know, it's
Dr. Tectonidis, you were telling me the other day that with such a severely acutely malnourished child, you can't just jump in and start feeding them. You have to deal with metabolic issues first. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, actually, the severest cases are those that get referred back to the hospital unit, like we saw here. What's surprising is that previously we thought all children were at high risk, like this one, and had to be slowly refed in two different distinct phases. First, a phase where you give them just enough to prevent them from losing weight, more weight, and you try and stabilize their infections and the problem in the metabolic problems that they have in their body. But now what we've seen is that really only 10% are like that. The others, you can just give them the food, and like Chris was saying in the film, we can stuff them up. 9 out of 10 are like that. This is completely new, because previously we thought that all of them had to be taken care in sort of like an intensive care. But for the other 10%, yeah, those that are sick, probably the best indicator is when they don't eat. Those ones have got severe problems. Their immunity's gone. There's some reason why they're not eating, and those ones are really fragile. If you just give them, try and feed them too aggressively, you'll kill them. So those are the ones that now we bring back, and we go step by step. So that's what we saw, phase 1, phase 2. Phase 1 is just the level of feeding to prevent them from losing more weight, and it's we accompany that with high-duty antibiotics, and transfusion if they're very anemic, rehydration if they're very dehydrated. And then once they're stabilized, usually takes a few days, then we switch them into phase 2, and if we're happy with them, we send them back out into the original point where we saw the child was recruited from, which they called it a walk-in clinic there. And the old days, Jonathan's first experience, for example, in Angola, all of them had to stay in the feeding center for the full period. And that we've seen is not necessary in the end. In fact, it's almost dangerous for the kid, because if they stay too long one on top of the other, we used to have these big centers. Jonathan could tell you about Angola, 300, 400, 500 children in one center. Well, to try and maintain the hygiene in that center, to try and prevent the children from cross-contaminating each other, and also to take the mother away from all the other children at home, is actually doing harm. We had no option before, but now we have this other option.
I'll come back to that, but parenthetically, I meant to ask earlier, if that little boy somehow there could have been magically transported to Children's Hospital in Boston, do you think he could have been saved?
Difficult to tell, but I have to say he's so ill by the point that he came in here. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if he would have been able to be saved here, really. And we have quite a good stock of supplies in the field in terms of antibiotics, in terms of rehydration therapy, and one can never say there's a chance, but many of the children, by the time they make it to the center, are so ill that it's impossible to save them.
One other, you just alluded to this, Dr. Tectonidis, but one other issue is, I suppose, it's pretty expensive to get kids to these centers, to keep these centers functioning, and I suppose you have to feed everybody and make sure everybody's...
Yeah, that was another problem. Obviously, previously only people like MSF could do that because we have the means. We're supported by the public, and we have enough means to go and open these centers. We have to make sure that the mother usually comes with one other child, one other small child that she just can't leave at home. So we have 3 people to feed. For each patient, there's 2 additional people. We have to feed all of them, obviously. They all need a lot of water. That's the only way to prevent contamination. We have to clean that. There's got to necessary to have a huge staff. It runs 24 hours a day, so there's got to be doctors and nurses and shifts and hygienists and cooks. So it becomes a very big operation. That is completely, in the jargon, unsustainable for a Ministry of Health in a poor country. This new system that we have, where 9 out of the 10 of the kids can be taken just with weekly visits with basic medicines to treat the basic infections and given the special product that we'll talk about, this is revolutionizing things, because this makes it now no longer an excuse not to treat these kids. Before, they could say, well, look, we can't do that. We have to make priorities, education or else general health care, vaccination, but we can't. It's too expensive. We don't have the means to treat these, like trying to treat cancer in a poor country. They just can't. Almost none of them can. But now there is really no longer an excuse. It's so easy now. It can be done with very little budgets in the end.
Well, we won't tease you any longer. What is the new system, and how did it come about?
Well, the new system is using these specialized products. Basically, the old system was milk-based. So the first phase where they were talking about where it's only a liquid diet, where it's stabilization, we were using a specialized milk. In the old days, we used to make the milk with oil, sugar. We used to take milk, powdered milk, add oil and sugar. Then we eventually started adding vitamins because we realized that there were certain vitamins that were missing, and minerals. Minerals are iron, copper, selenium, chromium, stuff that you would never think of that the human body needs, but it essentially needs, because if there's none, the kid won't eat. The kid will get worse. So we started adding that. Then eventually we got into these specialized milk products, which were pre-mixed for us, and all we have to do is add the water. And this was our system for years. One brilliant researcher started saying, well, if I can make it into a solid form, then we don't have to keep them all together, and we can start using it as an outpatient basis. And he eventually came up with this product, which is essentially the equivalent of the milk, but in paste form, in peanut butter paste form. There's another one that's like more of a milky paste or a milky cookie. But these are the equivalent of milk in solid form. So in a type of form that can be taken at home. They have numerous other advantages because of the packaging, because of the presentation. There is so little water in this solid form, it cannot be contaminated. Bacteria cannot survive in it. So in the type of conditions we're working in, it's ideal. The mother doesn't have to add water and doesn't have to cook it. They don't need extra wood. She can take the kid into the fields. She's working all day during planting season. She just has to give the child the little package, and the child will keep on eating it all day, and she can continue working. The mothers, for them, it's a miracle.
This researcher, is that André
Briand, yeah, from the...
So this is a packet. For those of you who aren't here, this is a foil packet called Plumpy'nut, and it's ready-to-eat therapeutic food. One sachet is 500 kilocalories, and this is everything the kid needs. It's sort of squishy, about the size of a tissue.
A child that's 5 kilos with one of these will maintain its weight. With 2 of them will grow big, fast. It needs very little. The child's requirements in a 5 kilogram child eats one of these a day, it will not lose weight. It eats 2 and it will gain weight extremely fast. It can put on 1 kilo, 2 kilos in the space of 3 or 4 weeks.
And the kids like it?
They love it. This one has got to taste like peanut butter. And peanuts in Niger, for example, are very, very popular. They all plant them. And the other advantage that you just rip off a small corner, and the child will not let go of this. Their brothers and sisters can't take it away from them. They hang on to it, and they just eat at their rhythm. They eat at their rhythm. So the mother doesn't have to feed them. What we're seeing in this context of Niger. It's not true everywhere, but this is peculiar to the Sahel, to that whole strip from Ethiopia to Senegal, is that it hits the small children before they're able to eat by themselves. As soon as they learn to eat by themselves, they can keep up with their brothers and sisters. They tend to do okay. So for these small children, it's ideal, this type of package, because the mother doesn't have to cook, doesn't have to feed by spoon. The child just sucks on it. So the packaging is almost as important as the contents. The contents, this is the product of a huge amount of intellectual effort. It's not just make peanuts and ground them up. This is 30 years of research. The product itself and even the packaging took a lot of thinking. But the research was first to develop those milks. What needs to be in there? What carbohydrates, what fat, what level of carbohydrate, what level of fat, what level of protein, and then what level of each of the vitamins. There's 15 vitamins, there's 15 minerals in here. What level not to be toxic, and what level is absolutely essential for them to grow quickly. And that's 20 years of research by many researchers. Then the next step was that when that person took the milk and made it into this, and put in the right packaging, and all this is permitted MSF to jump up. When we were working in Angola, we thought we had a huge operation there in 2002. We treated 10,000 malnourished children. That was still in the old system. So we had many of these feeding centers. This year we're already at 50,000. The film said 20,000. We hope to treat 20,000. It was before the crisis, the food gap hit. We're at 50,000 now. For us, that's absolutely incredible. We've jumped in 3 years from 2002 to 2006 and 2005. In 3 years, we've quadrupled our possibility of taking more children in.
So these don't have to be kept cold. They're easy to transport and everything. What do they cost? What does one of these cost?
I think it costs about 20 cents. And the full treatment of a child right now is $20. But this is still in an early phase. Now they are able to produce it locally. So the price, and we're only at an early phase. It's still only people like MSF and other organizations like us that are using it. If this becomes a policy that all Ministry of Health implement with the help of the United Nations system, obviously the price will fall, this market scale, the economy of scale. But right now, the full treatment is estimated at $20 for one.
And the full treatment consists of what?
3 to 4 weeks. These product twice, 2 of these a day, 2 to 3 depending on the weight of the child. Medicines, the essential medicines for antibiotic treatment, and that's it for the ambulatory kit.
What's this other stuff over here? This white cake-looking thing. Looks like a bar of soap or something.
Yeah, that's the other format. There's another product that's on the market, which is in biscuit form, and it's similar. It's a copy of the milk, and it's got the same indication. So it's the same thing. It's taking what we know, all the scientific knowledge behind the therapeutic milk, and trying to make a solid product that will be easier to use and doesn't need cooking and cannot get contaminated. And this is a cookie form. They're not having as much success because the paste and the packaging are better of the other one. So they have caught on, Compact, the other company that's in Denmark, and so they're going to now convert it into a paste in an aluminum foil packaging because they saw that they were falling behind It's very good that there's competition. If there's only one company, it would be terrible.
This is, by the way, called Plumpy'nut. It's a French company, right? And they're, I gather, getting local companies to franchise this and make it in these countries.
Yeah, they've already started producing in Niger, in Congo, in Lubumbashi, in Malawi, and I think in Ethiopia. There's 4.
How cheap do you think it could become?
I think already what they're producing in Malawi is about 1/2 the price of what the product from France.
10 cents.
Yeah,
per packet.
And I think it can go much further down. I mean, it's just a question. In the end, it's going to be the packaging that's going to cost the money.
Gee, maybe someday we'll all live on this stuff.
Actually, no, because it's not meant, it's a therapeutic product. That's the whole thing. This is a therapeutic product. When we first talked about this in the news, some people from down south here, peanut producers, called us, said, we have tons of excess peanuts. We're dumping it. Can't we just give it to you? We'll make peanut butter. No, this is 30 years of scientific research. It's got to be added to it, the peanut butter. It's not just peanut butter. There's powdered milk as well, and oil and sugar. But added to that is all that special conception of minerals and vitamins. It's a therapeutic product. It may even be dangerous for a normal child.
Well, that's the starting point. How do you actually end up using it? What is it made possible in terms of the way you organize the rescue of these kids who are on the brink of...
So there we saw in the film, well, that's why we really enjoyed this film for a number of reasons. First, because Chris was the one that ran this project for 3 years to get it going, Chris Bashir. So it was only poetic justice that he showed up.
He's the doctor in the film, yeah.
But also you see the whole thing. So you see what they saw at the very beginning, what they call the walk-in clinic. We call it an ambulatory center. And then you see the child, the worst one. You saw them waiting in the front there. The worst one was brought into to the hospitalization unit, but the other ones were still there, and that was small numbers. In the peak of the crisis this year, it was huge numbers there. We were following about 400 people, 400 children in each of these ambulatory points, and there they come once a week. They get their card. You saw the white cards. They get their card, which shows the weight gain. It's very visual, plus we write our notes there, what medicines we've given. They get their card, they get their card, they wait in line. All of them have bracelets. They come for consultation. The doctor will see them, make sure that they're okay. If they need any medicines, we'll prescribe the medicines. And then they go on and they're given 14 sachets of this product. And they go home and they come back once a week. And plus, we have another group of people, mothers, that are bringing their kids for the first time to get screened in. So we have the ones that are coming back, and we have the new cases each week. So we have weight where they do weight and height, and they measure it on a scale to see if it classifies as severe malnutrition, and they get into the program. And they're given the basic medicines at the first treatment, the first visit. If they're too sick, they're brought to this hospitalization unit. If not, they're given everything, and they come back once a week. So for the mother, it's only a once-a-week visit. It's still quite an effort on her side, because it's often quite far from her place. For example, this Maradi Center has about 14 or 15 ambulatory points that depend on it for a referral. So we can't put them everywhere. So some mothers come from big distances, but we have almost no defaulters. In other words, once the mother comes once, she stays. Clearly, they are seeing it work, and they're so satisfied with the result that they will come from 30 kilometers away, 40 kilometers away. Some of them walk, some they get together in taxis, but they clearly understand that this is working. This is really amazing to see.
How has this changed the proportion of kids who need to come to the treatment feeding centers for treatment?
Well, this is the thing. I think that having these centers, before, I think, having only one center in a whole area like Maradi, the mother won't come until the kid is almost dead. And therefore, they're much sicker. And we see them. That's why we had this whole idea that all malnourished children need this intensive care. Now, as we go out closer to them, they come earlier. So they're much less sick. And in fact, this year, treating 50,000 people in Niger. Last year, we treated 10,000. This year was a very bad year. Our bad in sense of food insecurity and increases in levels of malnutrition during the food gap. The food gap is that period when what the food they got from the previous harvest runs out, and they're still waiting a few months to the next harvest. That food gap is critical, and the numbers exploded this year. It was a bad harvest, a bit of a bad harvest. This last year, cereal prices, there's a lot of speculation on cereal prices, and there was just a huge increase in malnutrition. But having gone out to them, they're coming much quicker, and they're less sick. The fact that we're closer to their villages makes it easier for them and to come much quicker, so that those ones don't, the proportion of severe is gone down, and our mortality rate is less this year than last year, even though we treated 5 times more. There's more of these children that are just purely hungry. This is actually typical in a food crisis year. Out of a food crisis year, the proportion of sick children is higher. In a year where it's mostly lack of food, the children are mostly hungry. So we have less severe cases, or proportion of severe cases.
I noticed
the coverage.
Go ahead.
Because the coverage area is much, much bigger when we can do this ambulatory treatment. So just to be clear, the difference is between having an inpatient therapeutic feeding center where all of the children have to come to this unit to be treated versus being able to go out sort of farther into the community so that kids and the families can stay at home and be treated and just travel sort of a shorter distance. So I was trying to think of an example locally. So imagine, Boston, big food crisis, major malnutrition, right? So what if we had a therapeutic feeding center here at the Museum of Science? So we would have good coverage for, Charlestown and Kendall Square and, the side of Boston here, but would people really come from the South Shore, the North Shore, or Framingham all the way here? I'm not sure if they would. But what if, instead of having the one team here, 7 days a week, what if the team stayed here 1 day a week, and then 1 day a week went to the South Shore, 1 day a week went to North Shore, 1 day a week, went out west, and then all of a sudden the coverage areas become huge, and as long as the children will come every week or 2 weeks to get their Plumpy'nut or their and a medical evaluation, then we've now expanded the coverage area tremendously. And if anyone in this huge area requires more intensive treatment, if they have any one of those severe complications of malnutrition that can be that can lead to death, then they can be referred in. So then we're only having to transfer very few numbers of kids, the kids who are the sickest, into, say, this is where our hospitals here in the Museum of Science. So now we only have to transfer a few kids here from all over, and we have all these sentinel sites where we're at constantly.
I noticed the film talked about a 94% cure rate. What does cure mean in this context?
A child who's treated nutritionally is cured when generally when they're free of those complications that are associated with malnutrition, and their weight for height ratio reaches a certain point. So, normally a child would have 100% weight for height ratio. Their weight is normal for what their height is. But with severe acute malnutrition, or different levels of malnutrition, the weight starts to fall off. So we define, one definition of severe malnutrition is when that weight for height ratio is less than 70%, which is less than 3 standard deviations below the mean. So when a child comes to the center, hopefully gets treated from infection and all of these other complications, and then starts to feed and grow, and when that weight for height ratio gets up to 85 or 90%, then that's considered a cure, say.
When kids get into the phase 2, when they're out of the immediate crisis and they're in the fattening phase, how fast do they gain?
The target growth weight is on the order of 10 to 15 grams per kilo per day. So depending on how bad off they were when they came, that process takes anywhere from weeks to even months in some cases. And that's another reason for the ambulatory center, because to keep a family in an inpatient center for months is very difficult for the family, especially when there has to be a caretaker, and it's almost, in most cases it's the mother who's there, but it's the mother's responsibility really to care for the rest of the family at home as well. So to keep them in the center for the months that it takes for a child to be cured is very difficult. But if they can do this home-based treatment and stay at home, it doesn't matter how long it takes, as long as the child's getting better.
I'm haunted by this figure at the end of the film. about, the estimate of 500,000 kids expected to die in 2005.
That was a mistake on their side.
Okay.
There's a number of things we should say in the film about Chris. Actually, I said, but the kid that was given the medicines. I mean, that doesn't happen every time. It's a bit unfortunate that we had the child choking on the medicine. Usually, we do it in a better way. But anyways, but that figure at the end is wrong. 500,000, actually it's 800,000 children were considered at high risk of severe malnutrition. Doesn't mean all of them will die. It was sort of worded wrong. But, not every child with severe malnutrition dies. It's unbelievable. They can go through it, and then when the harvest comes in, they start eating again. This is the case in cases like Niger, Ethiopia, India, Bangladesh. It's amazing, and they will stay like that. They will go up and down like that for several years, and then finally, when they get a little bit bigger, then they stop getting malnourished every hunger gap. The relative risk, what they call the relative risk, if you take a normal child and a severely malnourished child on a population scale, all the normal children, all the severely malnourished children, and compare their rates of mortality, it's on a population level, it's about 4 or 5 times higher risk of death once you become severely malnourished. But clearly that doesn't apply to each individual kid. So the ones that are eating and that are in ambulatory care, those ones are they're at high risk of catching something and then going down fast, but many of them, even left alone, will get better. That's why they don't all die. But it's obviously an effect on a population level on mortality. Niger has the highest under 5 mortality rate in the world because of this malnutrition problem.
How long would it be before we have some sense of the impact on mortality from malnutrition that these innovations will be having?
Well, malnutrition is considered to be, I mean, if you talk to all the epidemiologists and the public health specialists, it's considered to be a cofactor in 50% of unnecessary childhood deaths, which they calculate to be about 10 million a year. So, those that are working in malnutrition, André Briand and others, Mike Golden, I've been pushing for so long that we get more involved in trying to treat it. If it's a cofactor in 50% of all wasted children, because these are deaths that are completely avoidable, then why shouldn't more effort be done in terms of rehabilitation of malnourished children? The problem has always been that the only way to do it was in these heavy centers. So now with this product, there should be a real movement to try and get this out and start treating. And clearly we'll have an impact. And we see it even on a local level. Once we start our food feeding programs, the mortality goes down. We monitor mortality. In Darfur, for example, in one big camp we were working, we have home visitors that cover neighborhoods and go and find out if there were any deaths at night, every day. And we calculate the mortality, and we see that our intervention lowers mortality. When we arrive, the mortality rate is at an unacceptable level, and there's all sorts of calculations or figures per 10,000 people per day that tell us it's an emergency situation. And as we intervene, we see that drop. So clearly these interventions do help. And if it's done on a big enough level, we will see childhood mortality rates drop.
What's Milton saying? Yeah, is that when groups report mortality in kids under 5, it's usually like a pie chart. In the middle is malnutrition, and this is like people are dying from respiratory infections, and they're dying from diarrhea, and they're dying from malaria. But if they didn't have malnutrition, then maybe they wouldn't be dying from these other things, because it affects the body in such a dramatic way that sets it up for these other conditions to take over.
Well, you say that there should be a movement now to amplify these programs. Is that what's going to happen?
Well, that's why we're here today. I mean, that's why we are really happy to come. That's why we've been on other programs. That's why we've been pushing. We've been outspoken. We had a conference in New York the other day. There's a conference at the end of November in Geneva that's trying to because things move slowly in the humanitarian world, just like things move slowly in government here. There are big bureaucracies that you have to shake a bit to move. But there is hope. I mean, at the end of this month, there'll be a big conference in Geneva, and theoretically, the WHO, which is the World Health Organization, and UNICEF should put their rubber stamp on this new system of rehabilitating malnutrition, because the Ministry of Health in African countries or in other countries in India are still working that the old standard is they all must be hospitalized. So they have to, first step is for the World Health Organization and the UNICEF to rubber stamp it and say, no, this works. And in fact, it's even better for most children. So that's the first step. And then the next step is they have to get funding. They have to be aggressive enough with the general public and with their donor governments that are participating in the United Nations system to say, now we want to bring this system to the countries that need it most. So we're going to be behind with a hammer, and whenever they slow down, we're going to smack it on the table. It's unacceptable to accept now that these children just are like sacrificed for the general cause, development. It's not acceptable. As a doctor, for a doctor to see that, can't understand it. When all it needs is that. It's just totally unacceptable. How do you move big bureaucracies? By getting more people together, all these people that came and all the people that are watching, and screaming. That's how it changes.
What do you mean by sacrifice to the global development?
Well, because, it's just considered that if you listen to so many people in the development community, they say they always put out the chronic and the acute. You get this trouble between public health and clinicians. The doctor wants to do everything for the patient. The public health person will say, we can't. You've got to watch out for your budgets. That's totally legitimate when you're getting into $1 million to save somebody who's, who has a terminal disease, and you're going to only extend their life by 2 months. Public health specialists have a legitimacy there. In our hospitals, we're told by the administrators that we can't use any drug we want. We are limited. But here we're talking about, peanut butter with a bit of minerals and vitamins inside. Even though it took 30 years to develop, it's very simple. There is no reason. There's always this. But when you hit the development community, there's always this opposition between, no, we can't take care of the problem today. We have to concentrate on the root causes. And maybe 30 years from now, we won't have this acute problem. But for a doctor, that's impossible to accept. And it becomes even more impossible to accept when the treatment is so simple. If it was needed CAT scans and intensive care units, and then we would maybe be a little bit more, this type of thing, we can't accept that Niger has to wait 30 years by educating their children, investing in health, and building new roads, and improving more fertilizer use for harvest, and all this development discourse, that we're going to wait 30 years, and then maybe there won't be kids dying from malnutrition. The main reason why there's such high mortality in Niger amongst children is not the root causes that the mothers are not educated and the fathers don't realize and that there's not enough health. The main reason is that nobody treats it. That is the fundamental reason. After that, to work on and prevention is another story. But the fundamental reason why they're dying is because nobody treats it. It's not all because the mothers aren't educated. Nobody treats it. The mothers are certainly educated enough to come to our centers. Once they see it works, they walk 40 kilometers.
I can imagine some people might be seeing this and thinking, well, it's good to rescue these children who can be against that, but then you're just sending them back out to the same conditions. And what about that? What about the chronic problem, the chronic malnutrition problem? Is there any emerging answer to that?
Well, they're not in opposition. It's a false contradiction. The fact that we treat them does not mean that other people, the development community, and all those that know much more about it than I do, can't keep on working on roads and harvests and that. There's another thing. I really fundamentally think that there's been so much preaching to these people. You have to breastfeed. You have to do that. Don't do that. Send your girls to school. I think that they never seen anything out of it. I really think that if you want to get them to participate in development, you have to treat their kids first. And that's my belief. I really think that we teach them. We talk, our nurses tell them, washing your hands, don't forget this. It's constant. If you listen to our nurses there, we have terrific people working for us. They're teaching all the time. We're treating their kid and we're giving them messages, public health messages. I bet you they listen to a lot more to us than all those pamphlets and the nice billboards that they put up. Wash your hands, send your girls to school and all that. Because it's nothing. They've been hearing this. It's 30 years now of this development language, and still the country is gone down. So, first of all, they're not in opposition. I applaud the development work that was done in Niger. You saw the nice roads. They've done many things. They've developed a whole onion marketing. And now Niger has become the biggest producer of onions in West Africa. They've done many good things. Irrigation. It's not enough. They should be doing more. But the two are not contradictory. And if they tell me, no, you can't treat because we're doing other things and we're going to... I don't accept that. I don't think it's not unacceptable.
How does that work? I don't want to only turn to Dr. Tectonidis all the time, but jump in.
That works. So say there's a community where, say there's a village that's a couple hours away from one of the nutritional centers, and there's, it's a community that we're concerned with. Maybe there's a high percentage of children who are coming with severe malnutrition from this community, and if there's children coming with severe malnutrition, then for sure there's a much larger number of kids with mild or moderate malnutrition there who are just waiting. And you made reference to it in the film, like, at the rate you're going, in another week or two, right, then you'll be there. So it would be nice, obviously, to intervene at that stage in the game before they get sicker. So, so picture a village with 8,000 or 10,000 people, and the way, say, a targeted blanket feeding program works. So say we wanted to hit all of the children with mild or moderate malnutrition in that community, which I should say, I point this out, I think. Do you have some of these? Yeah. So this is what's called a mid-MUAC, mid-upper arm circumference band. It's a very rapid, easy, simple, quick, inexpensive screening tool for malnutrition that one, puts around the midpoint of the upper arm and pulls the band to see the circumference. And if you're in the green, that means everything's okay. If one's in the red, then that corresponds to a state of severe malnutrition, and then if one's in the orange or the yellow, then that's mild or moderate. And I mean, if one takes this and puts it to even the uppermost limit of the red zone and looks at this and thinks that this is good in a child who's aged 6 months to 5 years, and to think, again, if you have children or take this to wherever children might be and just get a sense for what that would be like, it's difficult to envision. It's difficult to imagine.
For our audio audience, it's sort of the size of a fat twig. You could imagine a 5-year-old with an upper arm that small.
But what happens for these large distribution programs? Generally, the group will do something like take over the soccer field for the day of the distribution, and the whole village will come out. So everyone will come with all the children, and they'll sort of all be lined up on one side of the soccer field. Like they'll all be lined up here, and everyone will get single filed into funnels, into a single file line, and they come through the line, and then we identify kids who are less than 5 years of age, and then those kids who are less than 5 years of age will have this MUAC performed. And kids who are in the green zone, we say, okay, well, you're actually okay for right now, so we don't feel the need to give your family food for the moment. If you're in the red zone, then that's sort of danger. So we actually will have them sort of wait in a tent till the end of the day, and we'll take them back to the hospital or the therapeutic feeding center, inpatient, where they can receive more specialized care. But then if they're in the orange or the yellow, they'll sort of proceed forward, and then that family will get food for the day. It's just interesting to note, how does one keep track of all the kids so they don't get back in line again? Because you're talking about thousands of family, maybe 5,000 kids. There's this, I don't know, one way that I've seen done is with this gentian violet is a purple antiseptic dye that's used very frequently in these settings. But when one puts it on, it's not easily removed. It's not easily scraped off. So children who will get food will go ahead and paint their mouths with just a bit of the gentian violet. It's very safe. If anything, it has anti-infective properties. And if they're not going to get food, we'll just paint the bottom of their ear with this so that everyone's taken care of. No one can get back in line and everything. Everyone's very clear about who's getting what.
And what kind of food do they get?
They get a fortified cereal, which is corn and soya mixed, blended, and with added vitamins. A number, not the same amount of Z's, but some essential ones, vitamin A, vitamin C. So it's what's called a fortified cereal. They either call it CSB or Unimix, and they get a liter of oil. It depends. The situation's adaptable, but The usual thing is to give them a monthly ration, for example, of 5 liters of oil and 25 kilos of this fortified, the equivalent of this fortified cereal. And it's not just for the child, it's for the whole family. But they make it into porridge. It's semi-cooked, it's extruded, it's semi-cooked. It's very easy to cook. It's 10 minutes or 15 minutes of cooking, so it's also pre-cooked.
And how often do you come back to renew the...
Yeah, so depending on the situation, I mean, there's all sorts of variations in Angola. We've started this up again since Angola, since 2002. Why are we doing this? Because we feel that it takes too long for the United Nations to intervene in the first few months. It's a bureaucracy. The time it gets going, there's those first critical few months where we see that we move much faster. And MSF has stepped up now its capacity thanks to the money that we receive from people, because we're financed almost exclusively from individuals. So we have decided we cannot no longer wait, and we've started this up again. And each of those 3 situations was different. The latest one in Niger, for example, was fixed populations, where we went once a month, and we gave them a monthly ration for 3 months in waiting. It's finished now because the harvest has come. In Darfur, it was a camp situation. There it was also once a month, 1 day girls, 1 day boys. There we were up to 8,000 in a day, 8,000 girls, 8,000 boys the next day, or vice versa. So and we can do that in 5 hours. So that we've gotten better and better at this. We set up the night before. They're all there by 5 in the morning. They're all there, and then it's and also this. And in Angola, it was different. We would go out to different locations. There, we were doing it every 10 days. And what they call this blanket feeding can be adapted also according to the numbers of people. If there's way too many, we can target lower, the worst or the more severe cases. If there's not that many, we can do a real blanket, which is give all under 5-year-olds, even the ones that are well. We give everyone. It's a preventive measure to inject food into the family. So it's depending on the numbers and the severity of the...
Do people get angry when they find out that they don't qualify for the free?
Yeah, well, Chris was talking about that for the program, and I mean, there it's dramatic. But we usually try and give something else for the ones that don't get in. So a soap, a bar of soap. We give zinc tablets, which are preventive for diarrhea. So we always try and give something. But yeah, there's a limit to what we can do. I mean, we're still a small organization comparatively, and this year was terrible in Niger because we were the only ones until July. No matter how hard we screamed, it took time to mobilize people. The pressure on our teams was incredible because we were the only ones treating malnutrition, and it can get really rough.
Just to be clear, I guess the objective here with the targeted blanket feeding program is to get people past the hump so that during that crisis, the young kids don't get into really severe trouble.
Yeah, the principle is in a regular situation like Niger, is for the harvest to come and the situation to stabilize. In a camp situation, it's for the UN system to get into place and start delivering what we call the general food ration. In a camp situation where the population has been displaced for war or whatever reason, refugees, the World Food Program and the other UN agencies will eventually, once they get organized, provide a full family ration for each person in the family. So this idea is to try and keep the people or keep the children who are most vulnerable to malnutrition until that system, whether it's the harvest in a regular situation or food aid in an exceptional situation, to kick in.
We need to have some questions soon, right? When do we have to knock off? We have until 4:30? Okay, we'll do that in a second, but I just wanted to, there's one distinction that I think is interesting that maybe you all understand, but I didn't, between the mission of MSF in a malnutrition situation, an acute crisis, and the broader problem of chronic undernourishment and malnutrition. Can you articulate just what the distinction is?
I think that's better for now. Yeah, there's a number of countries in the world where there's high levels of malnutrition. Poor countries on a chronic basis: India, Bangladesh, Niger, Ethiopia, Madagascar. There's a number of countries where they have this on a chronic basis. And there is a high mortality associated with it. That's why Niger is the worst mortality in the world. But on top of that, in a bad year like this year, or in a measles epidemic, or in a civil war situation, there's an excess mortality. There's a much higher level of deaths. MSF tends to intervene on that. That's why we're an emergency organization. We tend to intervene above the normal, crisis situation. Unfortunately, the underlying chronic crisis that we don't attempt. That's our philosophy. We feel that, it would be nice to help, but that somehow we feel that if there is any justification, this is our personal philosophy, for us as foreigners to go into a foreign country to assist, it can only be for that. The rest is not our business. That's their country. It's them that have to get it together. That's why we have this philosophy. We're not United Nations. We're not development. The United Nations has to work with the governments. It's an intergovernmental thing, then help them and provide to try and work on that chronic level of mortality, or on the level of development of those countries. There they collaborate. They work with the ministries. We are completely private, autonomous. We sign our own agreement with the governments, and we work on that excess mortality. And when we can get rid of that, we get out of there. Once that's over, we get out. It's not our country. It's not our business. Their model of development, what they want to do, how they want to develop. We feel that's how it originally came. Unfortunately, things have become more problematic with things like HIV, because this is killing everybody. So there we start getting into very big dilemmas. It's no longer that obvious crisis of war, epidemic,
or it's a very
harvest
slow crisis.
failure. Yeah. And yet it's probably what's killing most today. So then even our own philosophy we're having to readapt. But then again, we feel sort of legitimate by the excess mortality it's causing over what would be normally happening in that country 20 years ago when there wasn't that problem. So that's where we are. We are extremely private organization. We refuse to be coordinated by any bureaucracy or government. We all sign our agreements with them. We give them our reports. But our initiative is private.
Do you imagine that, say, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, pick your time frame, that these acute interventions, that little packet there, are going to change the way these acute emergencies are approached everywhere?
I think already in most acute emergencies, it's now almost guaranteed. Everyone's working with this. Now the thing to do is to get it into the underlying system of ministries of health and the UN. And that...
not just in emergencies.
Not just in emergencies. That is really not so much our role again. Our role is to make sure that at least in emergency, but we're going to do it anyway. We're not going to tell them what to do because we don't know. They know better than us how to do it with the ministries of health. But I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that they realize that there's no excuse to let children die like that anymore. So I'm going to this meeting, which is all the UN, and MSF will put the pressure. Hopefully, I think that there's a lot of people in the UN that really want to do it. There's a lot of people in ministries of health who would love to do this. But they need also technical support and financial support through the UN system. We have to hope. Nobody would have thought we'd be treating HIV 5 years ago. MSF started, when we started there, everyone was saying, no, forget it, it's useless. In Africa, they can't tell time. How will they take their medicines? Well, we proved it. We have something like 50,000 people under treatment, MSF. And now it's considered the thing, and they're pushing, there's money, and it's going. 5 years ago, nobody would have believed that. When we were starting to do it, nobody believed it. And other people were not the only ones. Paul Farmer, you mentioned, there's others that really went for it. In Uganda, they also. So it's a combined effort. We're not alone. We're not alone trying to fight for this. There's other people. Steve Collins is a real good guy that introduced this idea of ambulatory care. Andre Briand in the UN. We're not. It's not just MSF. And you people also are important. If you people know about this, and the more the public knows, the better it is.
Well, I subscribe to that. So, public, ask some questions. Is anybody good?
Could you expand on the comment made that the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund require people to pay for their service? Was that a change Why did it come about, and what was their objective, and what is the result of that sort of policy?
Yeah, that's a big thing. But Chris has said that obviously it is. There's a truth in that. It's not. It's the original plan was in the post-colonial period. There was a lot of support for the new countries in Africa to help them build. There was a lot of optimism and interest, and let's help them, and let's finish colonialism's over. And there was a lot of help to their healthcare systems. They were top-notch hospitals in many capitals in Africa. When the mid-70s, the fuel crisis, our economy started going bad. You all know what was happening here in the 70s and 80s. Unemployment, real estate fell, the countries were a mess. I mean, New York, I was there 20 years ago. I just went there last week. I can't believe the difference. When I was there 20 years ago, there were people shooting crack cocaine everywhere. There was garbage everywhere. It's all changed. We were in a bad mess economically here, and so we sort of dumped the aid just went down and dumped it all, and the Cold War got very intensified and dumped Kalashnikovs into Africa to fight between one country and another. It made a mess. The last 25 years have been a disaster there. They were doing quite well until the mid-70s. There was a lot of hope. And the World Bank came in, the UNICEF, and there was this whole idea of cost recovery in the healthcare system. But cost recovery, and so this is where free healthcare stopped in Africa in the mid-70s, and it became paying healthcare. It's a forfeit cost. It's not really the full cost necessarily. There's subsidized medicines, etc. But still, it's the poor that get sick the most, and it's the poor that have to pay each time they go. So it's the opposite of a logical system. Those who need most to go to the healthcare system, that are the least healthy, are ending up paying the most for healthcare. It would be much better if it's really necessary to demand some participation, that it be like an income tax where those that have more money pay a little bit more and those that have less pay less. But in fact, the system that's today it's by act. So whenever you go, you pay. So those that have the poorest, if they want to go each time their kid is sick or they're sick with malaria because they live in the slums beside the pools of water and there's more mosquitoes, and they pay more money for health care if they could afford it than those that are living in good neighborhoods in less exposed to malaria and diarrhea and all, because they have piped water. And it's just totally illogical, the system as it stands.
Did you want to add something? Anybody else? Sure.
How long does an acute phase last? You mentioned that you're only working with the malnutrition issues in an acute phase as opposed to the chronic issue. So in the settings that you've been in, how long does that acute phase last? And then secondly, what do you do with adults who are also experiencing the same kinds of problems?
Yeah, it depends on the acute phase. That depends on the context. Obviously, in Darfur, for example, there was mass population movement because there was terror, and there the acute phase was the time for us to control malnutrition, for the World Food Program to get in, to start giving food out, for everybody to have shelters, and that was only 3 months. But the situation is still bad. We still have to continue providing assistance because there's been it hasn't gone back to where it was before the war started. Whereas in Niger, we can hope that after the harvest, we can really scale back our activities. Even then, the insult will probably last a year or two, but I think with with all the publicity we made, I think they will get additional help over the next few years. So again, each thing, Angola, it's finished. We're out. We're not in Angola anymore. As soon as peace came, the malnutrition rates in Angola, which had stayed high for 25 years, then one season they were down. We did a huge distribution, and we saw it happening. We were in Angola for 25 years. We're not there anymore. With the war gone, even though the government is still not doing that much for its people, the malnutrition's gone. At least it's not killing them and stealing from them. So just the very basic security in Angola, they don't need us anymore. It's a rich country, Angola. So in each context, again, is different. And for adults, yeah, we have had programs for adults in Burundi. We've had programs for adults in Somalia. there's times when the situation is so severe, even adults need treatment, and they can be treated with these products as well. We have different protocols. It's a different type of caloric, different amount of food that we have to give them for them, because the point is not necessarily to get them to grow, but to stabilize them. And you don't see them putting on kilos in so fast. They're not like children. But we have had huge nutritional centers for adults. Steve Collins, the man who I was talking about, is a specialist on adult malnutrition. So yeah, it has happened. I think the last time we did a lot was in Burundi, where there was bad years, there was a lot of fighting, people couldn't go to their harvest, couldn't harvest, couldn't work their fields. And I think we had huge feeding centers, hundreds of adults.
Remembering that the children are a much more vulnerable population than the adults, and if you're treating significant numbers of adults with malnutrition, often you won't be treating children because they've already died.
I think we all need to know more, and I certainly would like to know more and understand more about what causes these crises, because there's not one root cause, I gather. It's not just that the harvest fails and you have this happen. It's a much more complicated dynamic, as we were talking about before the program began, that even a marginal decrease in the harvest yield can interact with other economic forces like speculators in grain. And in the case of Malawi, which we read about in the New York Times this past week, undergoing a current food crisis, the Katrina effect can affect the ability of people in Malawi to buy corn in the market, because the Japanese get a lot of their corn from, or they used to anyway, from America. The closure of the ports in Louisiana meant that the Japanese shifted their demand to South Africa, which happens to have had a bumper crop of corn this year, but that meant that the prices got out of scale for the Malawians. So it's not just a local harvest failure that can precipitate one of these catastrophes.
That's really a good point, because we hear about globalization, but in fact it's true. It's true that into the very bush, I've worked in places that are so far in the middle of Africa. I mean, these places are beautiful, but they are monitorized. They are monitorized in the system. They have, everybody's into the system now. You cannot escape it. Everybody's into one big economic market. When that corn, the Japanese decide to buy more corn from, because they can't get the corn from America, can't be exported, and they start buying it from other sources, the price affects the poor person 500 kilometers in the bush in the middle of nowhere. It's amazing how things are interconnected. If that's true, if economically things are so interconnected, then in terms of people, how we have to help each other, it also has to be interconnected. We can't just say, well, they're not in our country. They're not in our country. We have no responsibility for them. If we're going to integrate ourselves economically, we also have to integrate ourselves politically in terms of standing up and not letting people just wasted lives.
Well, I had thought that perhaps AIDS, HIV and AIDS might bring the world closer together, and I think in many respects it has, although it's still easy for many people in rich countries to say that's not our problem. It's somewhat changing. One thing I'm interested in covering the possibility of pandemic flu is that really does grab everybody's attention, and they can easily see, oh, this does affect me in a very direct way. I was in Vietnam a few weeks ago, and it was very clear that the ability of the Vietnamese to field surveillance teams to find out whether we're getting clusters of human-to-human transmission in the rural areas of Vietnam is going to be crucial to the whole world, certainly to us, because there's really a very narrow window of opportunity. Some mathematical modelers think it's maybe about a month between the time that human-to-human transmission begins to develop in a serious way and our ability to contain it, if we can. Nobody's ever done that before. But the hope is to be able to identify it, fly in, Tamiflu, blanket a community around the first cases. Hopefully it won't occur in Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh City, but somewhere somewhat remote so that you can limit travel and social mixing and stamp it out at the source. But that's not going to happen unless there's a lot of investment in those places. That may not even happen then. But it certainly does underscore how, in so many ways, not just with flu, but many other diseases, we're all pretty interconnected.
Well, that's, there's always the two arguments. The argument of utility. Why should we help other people that are not our neighbors or even our neighbor? There's the argument of utility, whether the danger is eventually going to come back from us. You hear this type of argument about preventing it from spreading out of Vietnam, or if we don't help in such and such a country, they're going to become terrorists. And so this is the argument of utility. Then there's the argument of morality. We should help them because we're all human beings. And both of them are valid. I mean, in the end, helping
and they're not
them,
mutually exclusive.
Yeah, in the end, it's just the right thing to do. It's just the right thing to do.
And it's, just on a personal level, when one goes to these countries that are such completely different worlds, say, from the world that we have here, I'm always struck by the, when I, just for myself, when I meet people there, people who I've had completely different backgrounds, absolutely completely different, but yet we can relate so strongly, and that person could be my brother here for all intents and purposes. It's that, so it's all the same people.
We get just about, in MSF I've got just as much out of it as my patients have. Yeah. It's a big thrill, obviously, to help somebody who's in trouble. It's a big thrill. And more our doctors, those doctors that you saw, Innocent, you saw the one who put the child into the car, he's from Congo. Innocent, the other doctor that said the kid had died, he's from Burundi. Our staff is becoming more and more international. In Niger this year, we had people from Peru, from Burundi, from Congo, from Japan. Our staff is becoming international.
I was wondering what effect it has on the people who work in MSF and have been through so many of these experiences to see something come along like this simple technology that opens up new possibilities and helps a lot more people. I mean, it must have a kind of an electrifying effect.
Yeah, the ARVs and the fixed combination ARVs, the retrovirals, the malaria treatments that cover no longer, there was a big resistance to chloroquine in malaria, and now we have these much more effective treatments that came out of China. These things are a huge impact. It's a really good, and that there's people working on these things, even top-level scientists that are trying hard to develop new products. This is what we need. So little research gets into this, or so much research is into other things that are, in the end, very destructive.
Do you think that there is more appreciation for global health issues and a sense of lessening fatalism about these things than we used to have?
Hard to say, but I mean, the Time magazine has a big thing this week. It's on the TV with the flu thing, like you were talking about. HIV has become a big thing. It's hard to say. I think it's hard to say, that's so much at a superficial level. But yeah, you'd have to hope that now that everyone hears about globalization. I mean, now you're eating French cheese, buying Japanese cars. It's obvious, I think, to the people now that we're no longer in our old countries where each one is stuck into their little, and you eat only, you live only. You have to hope that seeing all these things and movement of people. I mean, Boston's got people from all over the world. That it brings you closer together. I mean, you have to hope. I don't know if it's really happening.
That said, I have to say, I think in the States, people, when one travels from the States, one's impressed with how much people from other countries travel much more, I think, than people in the States. Maybe that's an overgeneralization, but at least as myself, as someone, say, when I was in college traveling, and, people from here don't travel for long periods of time. People from other countries travel for months or even years. It's the norm, and I think one really gains a nice appreciation for what the rest of the world is all about when one can actually spend time in other countries, significant time in other countries.
Yeah, well, I'm from Illinois myself, although I've lived in Boston for 35 years or so, and I'm struck by how, there's a sort of very strong strain of insularity in America that goes way back, and the sense of that we can really wall ourselves off. and that keeps coming back. But I hope that there's a countervailing sense of global identity and identification. I think it's happening, but it's. But I may just be naive and over-hopeful. Anybody else would like to add anything or ask anything? I hope you've... Yeah, go ahead, please.
I'm struck with looking at that movie, and I'm looking at land that seems so wasted. And I'm wondering if when we're talking about globalization, we're also talking about climate, and we're also talking about how to... is there something that's also coming out that's working on preventing these periods where crops can't develop because there is no rain? Or is this something that we shouldn't be thinking about as well?
All these things are definitely not my specialty, but it clearly, what they call desertification is in the Sahel. The Sahel is that strip that goes from Senegal all the way to Ethiopia. It can be reversed. There's been areas where they have reversed it. What happens is that the peasants are pauperized in a system where their land, their actual land that they're harvesting or that they're farming gets smaller and smaller. They use less fertilizer. They don't leave fallow seasons because they're more and more pauperized. They're poorer and poorer. This is not necessarily the whole population. It's the poorer segment of the population. In a country like Niger, that's 30 or 40% of the population. In a country like Senegal, it's much less. It's maybe only 10%. But these are the poor that get marginalized, and they farm smaller and smaller, and they have to intensively farm. And the trees get cut down because they're still not burning, they're still using wood. So the whole thing is interrelated, obviously, and this is what the development people will tell you. You can't attack that unless you attack that, unless you attack that. It's all interrelated. But there has been places where they've reversed desertification by the proper use of land, by leaving it fallow, by planting trees. So it's not an inevitable process. I mean, there's places in Niger where they've reclaimed land from the desert over a period of 20 years. By using ecological techniques. So, yeah, it's possible to fight that. Unfortunately, Niger is having a hard time. Ethiopia is having a hard time too, up in the highlands.
Those images, though, I think are also very much dependent on what time of year they're taken, because these countries have very wet and very dry seasons, and it can look like you saw completely barren. And as soon as the rain starts, there'll be a river the size of the Charles that just appears out of nowhere, and green shrubbery will just come up from the ground in places that you never thought possible. Is the first thing, and then the other thing is there's some places I think in the world where, they never really were. It was a place that was never really meant for people to live. There's a region in Ethiopia, Wallo, which I think was one of the original inspirations for the first Live Aid concert in the mid-'80s, where there will always be a problem there with famine. And if those people who are living there could go somewhere else, then they probably should, but they can't. That's where they live. And now, 20 years later, it's the same problem there as it was then. There's just mild fluctuations.
Well, I hope you have enjoyed and profited by the discussion. We could take it all sorts of other directions and a good deal longer, but at least for the path we've come down, I hope it's been informative and encouraging. As I said at the beginning, I find it terrifically encouraging to think that it is possible to do something, and let's hope that there are more scientists out there working on low-tech solutions, affordable ones that make big differences like this. So thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you very much.